The Emerson oak, as my family had always called it, stood proudly at the far corner of my backyard, its massive canopy stretching over 60 feet in diameter. My great-grandfather planted it in 1924 when he first built our farmhouse on what was then the outskirts of town. As a child, I spent countless summer days nestled in the crook of its lowest branch with books and daydreams, protected from both sun and rain by its generous leaves. My grandfather proposed to my grandmother under that tree in 1947. My father built me a tire swing that hung from one sturdy branch when I was 7. My wedding photos feature the oak as a silent witness to our vows, its golden autumn foliage providing a perfect backdrop. This was not merely a tree. It was a living family heirloom that connected generations through shared memories and milestones. Maple Creek Estates slowly grew around our original property over the decades. What was once farmland transformed into suburban development, with our 3-acre plot eventually surrounded by newer, smaller lots with cookie-cutter houses. Our home and the grand oak remained as reminders of the neighborhood's rural origins. Most neighbors appreciated the historic charm. Many would comment on the magnificent tree during community gatherings or casual conversations over fences. Everything changed when the developer completed the final phase of Maple Creek Estates last year. With construction finished, they transitioned control to a newly formed homeowners association. Elections were held during a sparsely attended meeting in February, and Diane Henderson, who had moved into the largest house in the new section just 6 months prior, was elected president. Those of us who had lived here longer knew little about her, except that she had relocated from California, and frequently mentioned her previous experience with properly managed communities. I first noticed her staring at my oak tree during the neighborhood July 4th barbecue. She stood at the edge of my property, head tilted backward to take in its full height, her expression unreadable behind oversized designer sunglasses. When I approached to introduce myself, her greeting was cordial but cool. "That is quite an unusual feature for a developed neighborhood," she said, gesturing toward the oak. Her tone made it unclear whether this was a compliment or criticism. "I imagine it drops a significant amount of debris in the fall." I nodded and smiled, explaining the tree's history and importance to my family. "It has been here nearly 100 years, long before any of these houses existed." She responded, scanning the canopy again. "Well, times change. Progress requires adaptation. I have heard complaints that it blocks views and creates excessive shade for several properties." She turned to me with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Have you considered how it affects your neighbor's property values?" That conversation marked the beginning of what would become an escalating conflict. I tried to maintain friendly relations, attending HOA meetings and complying with the new community standards. I repainted my mailbox to match the approved color scheme, replaced my house numbers with the mandated font and size, and even removed the bird feeders that apparently violated some obscure provision about unsanctioned wildlife enticement. Throughout that summer, I noticed Diane bringing groups of board members to the sidewalk adjacent to my yard. They would stand in a small cluster, pointing at my tree and making notes. Occasionally, I caught fragments of their conversations, words like liability, obstruction, and removal drifting across the property line. A sense of unease began to grow within me, persistent as the deep roots of the oak itself. "You should document everything," my neighbor Tom advised one evening as we chatted across our shared fence. "Diane has been issuing violation notices left and right. The Robertsons already got fined for their vegetable garden, and the Chens had to take down their kids' basketball hoop. Something tells me your tree is next on her list." I dismissed his concerns at first. No HOA could force the removal of a century-old tree that predated the neighborhood itself. Surely there were limits to their authority. But as autumn approached and leaves began to fall, I would soon discover just how wrong I was about the lengths to which some people will go to exercise power over others. The first official notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, slipped halfway under my front door in a crisp white envelope with the HOA logo emblazoned in dark green. Compliance notice, vegetation violation, read the bold header. I scanned the document with increasing disbelief, as it cited Section 732 of the newly adopted HOA guidelines. No vegetation shall exceed 40 feet in height or create substantial shade encroachment on adjacent properties without board approval. My heart pounded as I continued reading the formal demand that I remedy the situation within 30 days or face escalating fines starting at $100 per day. At the bottom of the page, Diane had signed her name with an elaborate flourish, adding her title HOA President, as if I might have forgotten her position of authority. I immediately called the HOA management company, only to be informed that they merely enforced the policies set by the board and could not discuss individual violations. When I requested a copy of the complete HOA bylaws to verify this alleged regulation, I was told it would be emailed within 10 business days. 10 days to provide rules they were already enforcing seemed conveniently obstructive. That evening, I photographed the notice and began researching tree ordinances in our county. After several hours navigating municipal websites and local government portals, I discovered something significant. Trees over 75 years old with trunks exceeding certain dimensions were classified as heritage specimens and protected under local environmental conservation laws. Removal required special permits that were rarely granted except in cases of disease or safety hazards. Armed with this information, I printed the relevant municipal codes and visited our city arborist the following day. Walter Phillips was a soft-spoken man in his 60s whose eyes lit up when I mentioned my century-old oak. The Emerson property oak. Oh yes, I know it well, he said, nodding appreciatively. That specimen is actually already on our heritage register. Your grandfather had it documented back in the 1980s during our first conservation initiative. He pulled up records on his computer, showing me the official designation and protection status. No private entity, certainly not a homeowners association, can legally mandate its removal. I would be happy to provide documentation confirming its protected status. That afternoon, I hand-delivered the arborist's official letter to Diane's house, along with copies of the heritage tree designation and relevant municipal codes. She opened her front door wearing tennis whites, her expression shifting from surprise to annoyance when she recognized me. I have brought documentation regarding my oak tree, I said, maintaining a polite tone despite my simmering frustration. It is officially designated as a heritage specimen and protected by county ordinances. The HOA does not have legal authority to demand its removal. Diane accepted the envelope without opening it, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the paper. The board will review your objection. Her emphasis suggested she considered this a minor inconvenience rather than a legal barrier. However, I should remind you that you signed a covenant agreement when this neighborhood incorporated as an HOA. Those agreements supersede many local regulations. Not environmental protection laws, I countered. The tree predates the HOA by nearly a century. Its protected status was established decades ago. Something flashed behind her eyes, irritation or perhaps determination. We will see about that. The board takes community standards very seriously. She began closing her door. I suggest you start saving for those daily fines. They add up rather quickly. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered additional documentation and support. I took detailed photographs of the tree from every angle, had an independent arborist assess its health perfect, and began speaking with neighbors about the situation. Many were sympathetic, particularly those who had lived in the neighborhood for years. "She tried to fine us for our holiday lights last December," confided Sarah Miller, who lived 3 doors down. "Said they were too bright and the wrong color. My husband told her to pound sand, but not everyone stands up to her. She has created quite the little kingdom here." The confrontation escalated at the October HOA meeting, held in the community clubhouse. Nearly 30 residents attended, an unusually large turnout. When the agenda reached landscaping compliance issues, Diane displayed a PowerPoint slide showing my oak tree, labeled with measurements and highlighted with red circles indicating problem areas. "As many of you have noticed, we have a significant compliance issue with oversized vegetation at the Emerson property," she announced to the room. "Our governing documents clearly state—" "Excuse me," I interrupted, standing from my seat. "That tree is a registered heritage specimen protected by county ordinance. I have provided all relevant documentation showing the HOA has no authority over it." Several neighbors nodded in agreement. Tom from next door spoke up. "That oak was here when my grandparents bought in this area. It is part of our neighborhood character." Diane's smile remained fixed, but her knuckles whitened around the podium. "While we appreciate the sentimental attachment some may have, the board must consider property values and safety for all residents. That tree drops excessive debris, creates unwanted shade, and poses a significant liability during storms." The meeting devolved into heated discussion. Several newer residents backed Diane, complaining about leaves in their yards and theorizing about potential root damage to foundations, despite having no evidence. Other neighbors defended the tree and questioned the HOA's authority to override municipal protections. As the meeting concluded with no resolution, Diane approached me in the parking lot, her voice low but intense. "This is not over. One way or another, that eyesore will come down. The neighborhood has evolved beyond rustic farmhouse charm. Perhaps you should consider selling to someone who appreciates modern community standards." Her words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the autumn air. As she walked away toward her luxury SUV, I took out my phone and recorded a voice memo documenting her exact words and the threat they contained. Something in her tone suggested this conflict had progressed beyond bureaucratic enforcement to something personal. I did not yet realize just how far she was willing to go. Thursday, November 10th began as an ordinary day. I graded papers from my high school English classes, prepared dinner, and spent the evening watching a documentary about national parks. The weather forecast predicted rain overnight, and already I could hear wind rustling through the oak leaves outside my bedroom window as I turned in around 11. Sleep came easily after a long workday. The sound of rainfall against the roof created a soothing background that masked the first unusual noises. What finally woke me was not subtle, a mechanical roar that seemed impossibly close and completely out of place in the middle of the night. My bedside clock glowed too, 17 a.m. as I sat bolt upright, momentarily disoriented. Chainsaws. The realization hit with physical force. I scrambled out of bed and ran to my back window, throwing open the curtains to witness a scene of organized destruction illuminated by harsh portable floodlights. 3 men in work gear were systematically attacking my oak, one already halfway up the trunk on climbing gear, another operating a lift bucket from a truck parked on the access road behind my property. I did not bother with shoes or a jacket. I ran through my house and burst through the back door, the cold November rain immediately soaking through my pajamas. "Stop!" I screamed, sprinting across my yard. "What are you doing? Stop right now!" The workers paused momentarily, looking toward me with confusion. That is when I saw her, Diane Henderson, standing under a large golf umbrella, directing the operation from a safe, dry distance. She wore a raincoat over what appeared to be regular clothes, clearly dressed deliberately for this middle-of-the-night assault. "Keep going," she instructed the workers. "We have authorization." To me she called, "This is official HOA business. Please return to your home." I reached the nearest worker, grabbing his arm. "This is my property. That tree is protected. You have no legal right to be here." The man hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we have proper paperwork, HOA approved and city permits." He gestured toward Diane, who held up a folder of documents protected from the rain by plastic sheeting. "Those must be forged," I shouted over the idling equipment. "No legitimate permits would allow middle-of-the-night removal. This is criminal trespassing and destruction of protected property." By this time, lights were coming on in neighboring houses. Several people emerged onto porches or yards despite the rain, drawn by the commotion, and the industrial lights creating an artificial daylight in the normally quiet neighborhood. "What the hell is happening?" Tom called, jogging over from next door in a raincoat thrown over pajamas. "She is cutting down my oak." My voice broke with emotion. "Call the police now." Tom immediately pulled out his phone while his wife Barbara approached Diane. "Are you insane? You cannot do construction at 2 in the morning. There are noise ordinances." Diane remained unmoved. The board voted for emergency removal after receiving expert assessment that the tree posed imminent danger during this storm. She gestured at the wind-whipped branches. "We are acting in the interest of community safety." "That is absolute garbage," I shouted, rain and tears mingling on my face. "There was no such vote, no such assessment." More neighbors had gathered now, creating a surreal scene of pajama-clad spectators in the rain. Sarah Miller had brought her phone and was recording video of the entire confrontation. The chainsaws had temporarily stopped, but horrifying damage was already evident. Several major limbs lay on the ground, and a significant cut had been made in the main trunk. I turned to the workers directly. "If you continue cutting, you will be participating in a crime. That paperwork is fraudulent. This tree has protected status with the county." The foreman of the crew looked increasingly uncomfortable, rain dripping from his helmet as he glanced between me and Diane. "Ma'am, we were told this was an emergency situation with proper approval." "It is not," I insisted. "Please show me these supposed permits." "We do not need to justify enforcement actions to individual residents," Diane stated firmly. "The decision has been made by proper authority. Now please remove yourself or you will be interfering with HOA operations, which carries additional penalties." Tom returned, phone in hand. "Police are on their way. They said to tell everyone to stop what they are doing immediately." The workers exchanged glances, clearly sensing something was wrong. The foreman signaled for his crew to power down their equipment. "We will wait until the police sort this out," he announced, much to Diane's visible anger. "You have a contract to fulfill," she snapped at him. "The longer this takes, the more danger it poses. That was the entire point of the emergency removal authorization." "No legitimate tree service operates at 2 in the morning," Barbara called out. "This is obviously not above board." For 15 agonizing minutes, we stood in the cold rain, me still barefoot and shivering, neighbors gathering in increasing numbers, the tree service workers looking increasingly anxious to leave, and Diane maintaining her position with rigid determination. Each minute that passed revealed more of the devastating damage already inflicted on my beautiful oak. Large sections lay on the ground, exposing pale inner wood that had not seen daylight in decades. When police cruisers finally arrived, their flashing lights created a bizarre strobe effect across the rain-slicked scene. Two officers approached, taking in the unusual tableau with professional caution. "I am Thomas Emerson. This is my property," I stated immediately, teeth chattering from cold and shock. "These people are trespassing and destroying a protected heritage tree in the middle of the night without my permission." One officer turned to Diane. "Are you responsible for this work crew?" "I am Diane Henderson, president of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. We are conducting emergency removal of a hazardous tree with proper board authorization." She attempted to hand him the folder of documents, which he accepted but did not immediately open. "Ma'am, regardless of any HOA authorizations, construction and tree removal are not permitted between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. in this county. Additionally, we will need to see permits from the city arborist for a tree this size." As the officers separated people for statements, I stood staring at my mutilated oak. Even if they stopped now, the damage was catastrophic. The perfect symmetry of its canopy, cultivated over a century of growth, was destroyed. Several major limbs lay scattered across my yard like fallen giants. The tree that had whispered through countless summer evenings and sheltered generations of my family now stood partially dismembered, its fresh wounds gleaming pale in the artificial light. By sunrise, the police had documented the scene extensively. The tree service workers provided their company information and claimed they had been given what appeared to be legitimate paperwork by the HOA president. They departed, leaving their destruction behind but promising to cooperate fully with any investigation. As morning light replaced the harsh work lamps, the full extent of the damage became heartbreakingly clear. The oak was not completely down, but it had been critically injured. The arborist who arrived shortly after daybreak shook his head grimly. "The structural integrity is compromised. With these major cuts already made, the rest will have to come down for safety reasons." I watched in numb devastation as rain continued to fall on the exposed inner wood of a living monument that had survived a century, only to fall victim to a homeowners association president's midnight vendetta. What I did not realize then was that this horrific night would set in motion a legal reckoning that would forever change our neighborhood. The cold light of morning revealed devastation beyond what the darkness had concealed. My century-old oak, now reduced to a mutilated trunk with jagged limbs pointing skyward like accusing fingers, dominated the landscape. Sawdust mixed with rain created a paste across my yard, and massive sections of trunk and limbs lay scattered like battlefield casualties. Neighbors stopped by throughout the morning, expressions of shock and sympathy providing little comfort against the overwhelming loss. Walter Phillips, the city arborist who had previously confirmed the tree's heritage status, arrived by 9. His face fell as he surveyed the destruction, the professional detachment he typically maintained cracking visibly. "This is," he began, then shook his head, words temporarily failing him. He knelt beside the massive stump, counting growth rings with a practiced eye. 103 years, perfectly healthy. He stood with a grimace of professional outrage. This was a specimen we used as an example of ideal oak development in our regional forestry guides. Walter documented everything meticulously, measuring the trunk diameter, photographing the cuts, collecting wood samples. The monetary value alone is substantial, he explained as he worked. Heritage trees of this size and age are valued between $27,000 and $150,000 depending on species, condition, and location. But given the protected status and historical documentation, this particular tree would be at the upper end of that range. I struggled to focus on his words. The idea of reducing my family legacy to a dollar figure seemed almost offensive, yet I recognized the importance of this calculation for whatever came next. "What about the permits Diane claimed to have?" I asked. "She showed the police some kind of paperwork." Walter shook his head firmly. "Impossible. I oversee all heritage tree permits personally. Nothing was filed or approved for this address. Additionally, no legitimate permit would allow for middle-of-the-night removal except in cases of immediate public safety, like a tree actively falling onto a house during a storm." He gestured at the clear structural cuts. "These are planned removal cuts, not emergency stabilization work. This was a deliberate, planned operation." By afternoon, I had scheduled an appointment with Patricia Reeves, an attorney specializing in property disputes. My neighbor Tom drove me to her office, as I was still too shaken to safely operate a vehicle. Patricia listened intently as I recounted the events, occasionally stopping me to clarify timeline details or specific statements made by Diane. "What happened to you involves multiple areas of law," she explained after I finished. "First, there is civil liability for the destruction of your property, specifically timber trespass statutes, which in many states allow for triple damages when trees are deliberately cut without permission. Second, there are potential criminal charges related to trespassing, destruction of protected environmental resources, forgery of permits, and possibly fraud." She spread several legal reference books on her desk, flipping to highlighted sections. "In this state, destruction of a designated heritage tree without permits is a separate offense with specific penalties. The fact that this occurred at night with apparently forged documentation suggests premeditation that elevates the seriousness considerably." While Patricia explained the legal intricacies, her assistant brought in coffee. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, still feeling chilled to the bone despite the hours that had passed since standing barefoot in the rain. "The tree company claims they were provided with what appeared to be legitimate permits," I said. "How do we prove Diane forged them?" Patricia's expression turned grimly determined. "We subpoena all HOA records related to your property and the tree. If she presented this as board-approved action, there would need to be meeting minutes, votes recorded, and proper notification to you as the property owner. None of which happened, correct?" I nodded. "There was no notification, no vote that I know of. The last HOA meeting was 2 weeks ago, and the tree was discussed but no action was approved." "Excellent. We also request all communication between her and the tree service. If she misrepresented the situation to them or provided fraudulent documentation, that creates additional liability." Patricia made detailed notes. "I suggest we also depose board members individually. If this was truly her unilateral action using her position as cover, other board members may not want to risk their own liability by backing her version of events." By late afternoon, neighbors had organized to provide witness statements. Sarah shared her video recordings from the night, which clearly showed Diane directing the operation and claiming HOA authority. Barbara had photographed the documents Diane showed police, capturing images of what appeared to be city letterhead with approval stamps. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. The tree service owner, clearly concerned about his company's legal exposure, contacted me directly. My crew was told this was an emergency removal approved by both the HOA and city due to storm damage and imminent danger, he explained over the phone. "We were specifically requested to come after midnight because of the supposed urgent safety risk." Ms. Henderson provided what looked like proper documentation, but in retrospect, some elements seemed unusual. "We have never been asked to remove a healthy tree of that size at that hour." He paused before continuing. "I want to provide you with copies of everything she gave us, including the work order with her signature and the supposed permits. I have been in this business 25 years and never had a situation like this. My company wants no part of anything illegal." With this growing collection of evidence, Patricia suggested we formally involve law enforcement beyond the initial trespassing report. The next morning, we met with Detective Sandra Martinez at the police station, presenting our organized documentation and witness statements. Detective Martinez reviewed everything carefully, her expression growing increasingly serious. "What began as a possible civil matter or minor criminal infraction appears much more significant based on this evidence," she noted. "Forging municipal documents is a felony offense. Combined with the value of the destroyed property and the protected status of the tree, we are looking at multiple serious charges." She laid out several forms for me to complete. "I will need your formal statement. Then we will be interviewing the tree service employees, other HOA board members, and of course, Ms. Henderson. Based on preliminary review, I will be recommending this case to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution." As I signed the detailed complaint forms, I felt a strange mix of emotions: grief for my irreplaceable loss, vindication that the legal system recognized the seriousness of the violation, and a dawning realization that this conflict had escalated far beyond a neighborhood dispute about a tree. Diane Henderson's midnight decision had set in motion consequences that would reverberate through our community in ways none of us could have anticipated. Walking out of the police station, I paused to look at a photograph of my oak tree in its full glory, a picture I had taken just months earlier during summer, its majestic canopy providing shade for a family picnic. The contrast between that image and the mutilated trunk now standing in my yard crystallized my resolve. This was no longer simply about seeking compensation. This was about justice. The district attorney's office operated with surprising efficiency once Detective Martinez submitted her initial investigation report. Emily Chen, the assistant district attorney assigned to the case, requested a meeting within days. Her office was meticulously organized, case files stacked in precise order on her desk, legal certificates and diplomas lining one wall. She reviewed my file with the focused attention of someone accustomed to identifying crucial details among mountains of information. "The evidence here supports multiple serious charges," she explained, her tone matter-of-fact rather than reassuring. "Destruction of a protected heritage tree alone carries significant penalties under county environmental protection statutes. When we add potential charges for forgery of government documents, criminal trespass, and property destruction exceeding felony thresholds, Ms. Henderson is facing considerable legal jeopardy." I nodded, still struggling to process how a neighborhood dispute had escalated to criminal prosecution. "What happens next?" "We will present the case to the grand jury for indictment," Emily explained. "Given the evidence collected, particularly the forged permits on city letterhead and witness statements confirming Ms. Henderson directed the midnight operation, I anticipate they will return felony indictments on multiple counts." Meanwhile, Diane appeared either oblivious to or dismissive of the gathering legal storm. When confronted by neighbors about the midnight tree removal, she reportedly insisted she had acted within her authority as HOA president to address community safety concerns. According to Tom, who encountered her at the community mailboxes, She dismissed my legal actions as hysterical overreaction and typical resistance to necessary community improvements. Her confidence began to waver when environmental protection officials arrived to assess the site. The County Environmental Protection Division opened a separate investigation upon learning a designated heritage specimen had been destroyed without proper authorization. Their assessment included soil testing around the remaining stump, extensive photography, and measurement of the destroyed sections. This is one of the most egregious violations we have documented in recent years, remarked Daniel Akoy, the senior environmental compliance officer. Heritage trees are specifically protected due to their irreplaceable nature and ecological significance. The county takes these protections very seriously. The HOA board called an emergency meeting 2 weeks after the incident. I attended alongside nearly every household in the neighborhood. The community clubhouse filled beyond capacity with folding chairs added in every available space. Board member Rebecca Zhang opened the proceedings with visible discomfort. This emergency session has been called to address recent actions taken regarding the Emerson property tree removal and to clarify the board's position, she began, carefully avoiding looking directly at Diane, who sat rigidly at the center of the board table. To be absolutely clear, the full board did not vote to authorize any tree removal action. Murmurs rippled through the audience as Rebecca continued. Additionally, no legitimate emergency determination was made, no proper permits were obtained, and no notification was provided to the homeowner as required by our own bylaws. Diane interrupted, her voice tight with controlled anger. As president, I have emergency authority to address imminent safety concerns. The recent storm created a hazardous situation that required immediate action. That is simply not true, countered Board Treasurer Michael Acaffer, surprising many with his direct challenge. I have reviewed our bylaws extensively. The President has no unilateral emergency powers regarding private property. Any such action requires minimum notification to property owners and at least 3 board member signatures, none of which occurred. What followed was unlike any HOA meeting in neighborhood memory. Multiple board members publicly distanced themselves from Diane's actions, clearly concerned about their own potential liability. Residents took turns expressing outrage, not just at the destruction of a beloved neighborhood landmark, but at the abuse of authority the midnight operation represented. "Did you forge city permits?" Someone called out directly to Diane, causing a hush to fall over the room. "I will not dignify that with a response," Diane replied, though her typically confident demeanor showed cracks. All actions were taken in good faith for community benefit. The meeting concluded with a motion to suspend Diane from her presidential duties pending resolution of both criminal and civil proceedings. The vote passed overwhelmingly, with only 2 residents, both close friends of Diane, opposing. As she gathered her belongings to leave, the hostile silence in the room spoke volumes about her fall from neighborhood authority. The following week brought the most dramatic development yet. Detective Martinez arrived at my home with formal notification that the grand jury had returned indictments on multiple felony counts. Criminal mischief exceeding $20,000 based on the arborist's valuation of the tree, forgery of government documents, criminal trespass, and violations of protected environmental resource statutes. "Ms. Henderson will be arrested tomorrow morning," Detective Martinez explained. "Given the non-violent nature of the charges and her community ties, she will likely be released on bail pending trial. However, these are serious felony charges that carry potential incarceration if convicted." The reality of criminal prosecution felt surreal. What had begun as a dispute over HOA regulations had escalated to potential prison time. Despite my anger and sense of loss, this development brought complicated emotions. Is jail time really likely? I asked, uncertain how to feel about this possibility. That will ultimately be determined by many factors. The judge assigned, whether the case goes to trial or ends in a plea agreement, Ms. Henderson's prior record or lack thereof, and other considerations, Detective Martinez explained. What is certain is that felony charges have significant life-altering consequences regardless of the final sentencing. True to the detective's word, police officers arrived at Diane's house the following morning. Several neighbors witnessed her being escorted to a police cruiser, not in handcuffs but clearly in custody, her expression a mixture of disbelief and outrage. The image of the once powerful HOA president being placed in a police vehicle quickly spread throughout the community via text messages and phone calls. Later that day, local news outlets picked up the story. HOA president faces felony charges in heritage tree destruction, read the headline on the evening news, featuring footage of my mutilated oak and file photos of its former glory. The reporter emphasized the unusual severity of the charges, noting that environmental crimes typically resulted in fines rather than criminal prosecution. The combination of nighttime trespass, forgery of official documents, and destruction of protected resources elevates this case beyond standard property disputes, legal analyst Richard Torres explained on the broadcast. While unusual, criminal prosecution becomes more likely when violations appear deliberate and premeditated rather than accidental or negligent. As media interest grew, I received calls from environmental organizations offering support and tree conservation groups proposing memorial plantings. The oak that had quietly witnessed a century of family history had become a symbol of resistance against overreaching authority and environmental disregard. That evening, I sat on my back porch looking at the massive stump, all that remained of my family legacy. The initial shock and grief had gradually transformed into something more complex, determination that justice would be served, not just for my loss but to ensure such abuse of power could not happen with impunity. The legal machinery now in motion would determine exactly what form that justice would take. The arrest of Diane Henderson created a schism in our once peaceful neighborhood. Invisible lines were drawn between households, transforming friendly streets into cautious territories, where casual interactions became loaded with unspoken tensions. Longtime friendships fractured along loyalty lines, and community gatherings dwindled as residents avoided potentially uncomfortable encounters. Most surprising was the emergence of a vocal minority who defended Diane despite the mounting evidence against her. These supporters, primarily newer residents from her section of the development, circulated a petition claiming she was being persecuted for making necessary improvements to community standards. They characterized the heritage tree as an antiquated eyesore and suggested my pursuit of criminal charges was vindictive and disproportionate. You need to be prepared for community backlash, Patricia warned during one of our legal preparation meetings. High-profile cases like this often create polarization, particularly when they involve community leadership figures. Some people simply cannot accept that someone they trusted and elected could commit criminal acts. This warning proved prescient. One morning, I discovered flyers in several neighbors' mailboxes urging them to contribute to Diane's legal defense fund. The flyer characterized her as a dedicated community volunteer being criminally charged for addressing a safety hazard that the previous HOA leadership had negligently ignored. No mention was made of the middle-of-the-night operation or forged permits. More disturbing were the anonymous notes left in my mailbox suggesting I drop the charges before things get worse, and reminding me that you still have to live in this neighborhood when this is over. I reported these to Detective Martinez, who documented them as potential witness intimidation, but noted they were likely unenforceable threats.